Okay, development of newspapers, everybody. So this is from your book. The slide is even from a service, your book supplies. So in Julius Caesar's time, which was BC, before Christ, I guess it is, thousands of years ago, actions of the day. Again, it wasn't paper. It was written on a tablet, posted on a wall after each Senate meeting. You remember this guy, Johannes Gutenberg, first to be printed on the movable type printing press were books, but not too long after that, just paper sheets without big covers. They were light, easy to transport, carry around and read. News was in there. So again, from your book, some, the 1660s, first newspapers tended to be just, 2 pages joined together. So 2 printed pages is 4 pages to read, since you have front and back on each page. In the U.S. now, going over to the U.S. history, here's some information on this. John Peter Zenger, this was in New York City. Someone was jailed for libel, so this is what happens if you don't have freedom of the press. Okay. Circulated widely in Europe. First colonial printers, you've, I hope, heard of Benjamin Franklin, born outside Boston in a big family, a lot of kids. His brother James got hold of a printing press and was a printer seeking to publish, government publications there in the colonial government, in his state, his colony. Benjamin Franklin apprenticed with his brother James to learn the printing trade, which he did. And he quit before his apprenticeship was over and got his hands on his own printing press and went into business for himself. These were weekly, by the way, in these days. And they were very involved in fomenting rebellion in the colonies, were these newspapers. News from Europe came over in a boat, in boats, so it was a couple of months old, because it took 6 weeks or more to cross the Atlantic Ocean. So they published news from Europe, but it wasn't exactly the hottest news in those days. First daily published 1783. By 1801, 200 newspapers. Carrying and weekly advertiser, carrying ads. First mass medium to carry ads. First paper mill in New England. We sort of forget about the medium here, paper. To have newspapers, you had to have paper and ink and printing presses. By 1691, we had our first paper mill in the American colonies. Okay. A little more of the history. 1790, newspapers put their money together in New York City, and instead of sending 10 rowboats out to get the news, they each paid for a tenth of one rowboat to get the news from the ships arriving from Europe. It's interesting because today there are major companies. Reuters is one of them. Associated Press is another, that have news correspondents and reporters all over the world, and then a local newspaper or any kind of local news entity can subscribe to the news reported by these services. So in a sense, you've got news publishers, local news publishers, still sharing information, just as they did with this rowboat full of reporters. I like technology and how it affects media very much, and STEAM um, engines, the invention of steam engines in the early part of the 17th century. One of the first things they were applied to was movement, locomotion, and so you had the growth of railroads. And railroads, among other things, as you see from this little note, sped up the news gathering process because of telegraphs, the first electronic medium in the 1800s. And there was a telegraph cable that was laid across the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean from the U.S. to Europe. And so Morse code was sent from Europe to the United States. And so rather than waiting for a couple of weeks for a ship, you had immediate news coming from Europe, which was the first wire service, the Associated Press. Interesting. 3,000 newspapers in 1860. You can see the numbers here. And again, decade after decade, newspapers were the mass medium. Steam power was applied to printing presses, and photos were added rather than drawings. As photography was invented and improved pretty soon, there were photos appearing in newspapers, not just text and drawings. Well, there's a neat. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to put this YouTube video up. That's a steampunk video, Japanese anime. Where are you? Here we go. I'm going to stop and put up a cool little steampunk. I like steam.